thought he took everything. He really did. He took the house with the wraparound porch we picked out together, the dog we raised from a clumsy, oversized puppy, the friends who used to bring wine to our dinner parties. He took the money, the security, the future I had so meticulously mapped out in my mind. He stripped the walls of my life bare, right down to the studs, and left me standing in the rubble. He thought he left me with nothing, but he was wrong. He left me with the one thing he could never touch, the one thing he never truly knew. He left me with me. And that's where our story really begins. Not the story he tells, but the one that was left. Our life, before the detonation, was a masterpiece of comfortable illusions. From the outside, we were the couple everyone wanted to be. We had the right house in the right suburb, the one with the mature oak tree in the front yard, and the perfectly manicured lawn. We drove sensible cars. We took vacations to places that would look good on a Christmas card. Our love story was a well-rehearsed script. College sweethearts. A decade of marriage. A partnership that felt as solid and reliable as the foundation of our home. I was the architect of that life. I chose the paint colors, the thread count of the sheets, the blend of coffee we drank every morning. I remembered his mother's birthday and the name of his boss's wife. I nurtured our social circle, planned the parties, and smoothed over his occasional social awkwardness with a charming smile and a quick change of subject. I poured myself into the us of our marriage until the me was just a faint, transparent outline. I didn't see it as a sacrifice. I saw it as construction. We were building a life, and I was the project manager, the designer, the very heart of the operation. I loved it. I loved him. Or rather, I loved the man I believed him to be, the man I helped create. The end didn't come with a dramatic, movie-style confrontation. There was no screaming match, no thrown dishes. It was far crueler than that. It was quiet. It was a slow, creeping cold that started in the pit of my stomach and spread through my veins until I felt frozen. It started with the small things. The phone angled away from me. The late nights at the office that became more frequent. The scent of a perfume that wasn't mine, faint on his collar. I told myself I was being paranoid. Insecure. After all, our life was perfect. You don't find cracks in a flawless facade. The truth came out not from his lips but from the pitying glances of a so-called friend at a neighborhood barbecue. It was in the way she looked at me, her eyes full of a sorrow that felt rehearsed. "Oh, honey," she'd said, touching my arm. "You're so strong." Strong? Why did I need to be strong? And then I saw it. The whispers. The shared looks between couples across the patio. I wasn't just the last to know. I was the punchline. My perfect life wasn't just a lie. It was public entertainment. They had all been watching the tightrope walker, holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable fall. When I finally confronted him that night, the silence in our beautiful, perfectly decorated living room was suffocating. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply looked at me, this man I had shared my body and my dreams with, and his eyes were those of a complete stranger. There was no remorse. There was only relief. His relief. He was finally unburdened of the secret, and I was just collateral damage in his quest for a new life. The affair wasn't the deepest wound. The betrayal was. The calculated, systematic dismantling of my reality by the one person I trusted to protect it. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had allowed me to be humiliated. He had watched as our shared world laughed behind my back, and he had done nothing. That night was the beginning of the war. He didn't just want a divorce. He wanted an annihilation. He wanted to erase me. It was a scorched earth campaign waged by a man I no longer recognized. Our shared assets became weapons. The savings account I had so carefully managed became his rightful property. The furniture we had picked out together became a bitter point of contention. He fought me for a stupid, worn-out armchair, not because he wanted it, but because he knew it was my favorite reading spot. It was about inflicting pain, about proving he could take anything he wanted. Our memories were twisted and used against me in legal documents. Our romantic trip to Italy? I was financially irresponsible. The support I gave him when he started his business? I was overbearing and controlling. Every act of love I had ever committed was reframed as a flaw, a weakness, a reason why he was justified in his actions. He wasn't just leaving me. He was rewriting our entire history to make himself the hero and me the villain. The friends we shared, the ones who had sipped wine in my kitchen, either chose his side or vanished into an awkward silence, afraid to get caught in the crossfire. My support system crumbled overnight. The final day in court was a blur of legal jargon and quiet, devastating blows. I watched as the judge's gavel came down, systematically signing away every piece of the life I had built. The house, the savings, the investments, even the dog. His lawyer argued he had a bigger yard. It was a cold, clinical execution of a life. When it was all over, he walked past me without a word, his new life waiting for him outside the courtroom doors. I was handed a single key. A key to a small, empty, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, the first month's rent paid for out of what was once our joint account. A final, pathetic act of charity. I walked into that apartment, and the smell of fresh, cheap paint and new carpet filled my lungs. It was a smell of absolute nothingness. The walls were white, the floors were bare, the silence was absolute. I dropped my purse on the floor, I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the beige carpet, and I looked around at the vast, echoing emptiness. This was it. This was what was left. A key. An empty room. And a crushing weight in my chest that felt like it was going to split me in two. It was in that moment, on the cold floor of that soulless apartment, that I truly met rock bottom. It wasn't a dramatic fall, it was a slow, heavy sinking. The void I had been running from had finally caught up. It was a terrifying abyss of loneliness, of shame, of a fear so profound it felt like it had a physical form. Who was I without him? Who was I without the title of wife? Who was I without the life I had so carefully curated? The answer that echoed back in the silence was nothing. I was nothing. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours. Maybe a day. The sun went down, and the room grew dark. The streetlights outside cast long, distorted shadows on the walls. I replayed every mistake, every warning sign I had ignored. I dissected every word, every lie. I drowned in the shame of being the woman who was cheated on, the woman who was left, the woman who was publicly discarded. His story was written. He was the man who had escaped a bad marriage to find happiness. I was the bitter, abandoned wife, and in that darkness, I almost accepted it. I almost let that be the end of my story. But then, something shifted. It wasn't a lightning bolt of inspiration. It wasn't a sudden surge of strength. It was smaller than that. It was a flicker. A tiny, stubborn spark of defiance deep within me. It was the thought, quiet at first, then a little louder. No, I will not be the victim in the story he is trying to write for me. I will not let my life be defined by his betrayal. He took the house, but he will not take my home. He took the past, but he will not take my future. Getting up from that floor was the hardest physical act of my life. My limbs felt like lead. My body ached with a sorrow that was bone deep. But I pushed myself up. I stood, unsteady at first, in the middle of that empty room. And in that moment, the decision to stand was not an act of surrender to my fate. It was my first act of war. My own war. A war of reclamation. The journey back to myself didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, painful, and profoundly unglamorous process. There was no movie montage of me jogging in a new tracksuit and suddenly having my life together. It was built on small, almost imperceptible victories. The first victory was sleeping through the night. For weeks I had been haunted by nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat, reaching for a person who wasn't there. Then one morning, I woke up to the sun streaming through the cheap blinds, and I realized I had slept for 7 uninterrupted hours. I hadn't cried, I hadn't woken up gasping for air. It was just sleep. I lay there for a long time, just savoring the quiet peace of it. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. The next victory came in a flat-pack box from a big box store. I needed a bookcase. The apartment felt so empty, and my few remaining possessions were still in boxes. I bought a cheap, particle board bookcase that promised easy assembly. For 2 days, I wrestled with it. The instructions were confusing, the little screws were impossible to hold, and the Allen wrench they provided was a cruel joke. I got frustrated. I cried. I threw a piece across the room. I almost gave up a dozen times. In my old life, he would have done this. He was the one who was good at these things. But he wasn't here, so on the third day, I sat down with a cup of coffee, laid out all the pieces, and started again, slowly, methodically. And when I finally slid the last shelf into place and stood the wobbly bookcase upright against the wall, I felt a surge of pride that was so intense it almost knocked me over. I had done it. By myself. With nothing but an Allen wrench and my own sheer stubborn will. I ran my hand over the cheap laminate wood, and it felt like a trophy. Slowly I started to furnish my life, not just my apartment. I bought a coffee maker, a comfortable chair, a plant that I promised myself I would keep alive. Each item was a deliberate choice. It wasn't something we would have liked. It was something I liked. For the first time in over a decade, my taste was the only one that mattered. I painted one wall a deep, calming blue, a color he would have hated. It made me smile every time I looked at it. One of the biggest hurdles was food. Cooking for one felt pathetic. The silence of the kitchen was deafening. I ate cereal for dinner for a month. Then, one evening I was struck by a sudden, intense craving for the lasagna from our favorite Italian restaurant. The one where we celebrated anniversaries. The one where he proposed. The thought of going there alone was terrifying. It felt like walking willingly into a haunted house. I stood outside the restaurant for 10 minutes, my heart pounding. I could see our table, the one in the corner. I almost turned around and went home. But then I remembered the bookcase. I remembered the feeling of standing it upright. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and walked in. The hostess looked at me with a questioning smile. "Just one?" she asked. I almost flinched, but I straightened my shoulders and said, "Yes, a table for one, please." Sitting there, with a glass of red wine and a plate of lasagna, was one of the loneliest and most liberating experiences of my life. At first, every nerve ending was on high alert. I felt like everyone was staring at me, the sad, single woman eating alone. But then, I started to notice things I never had before. The way the candlelight flickered on the walls. The quiet hum of conversation from other tables. The rich, complex flavors of the food that I was actually tasting, instead of just eating while making conversation. I wasn't waiting for someone. I wasn't half of a pair. I was just me. A person, whole and complete, having dinner. By the time I paid the bill and walked out, I felt different. Lighter. I had faced a ghost and realized it was just a shadow. That night marked a turning point. I began to understand the profound difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness was the cavernous emptiness of that first night in the apartment, a lack, a void. Solitude was a choice. It was the quiet comfort of my blue-walled living room. It was taking a walk in the park by myself, not because I had no one to go with, but because I wanted to be with my own thoughts. I turned my little apartment from a place of exile into a sanctuary. I filled it with books I wanted to read, music he would have turned off, and the scent of candles he would have called frivolous. I started saying yes to things. A colleague invited me to a pottery class. The old me would have said no, worried about being bad at it, about not knowing anyone. The new me went. I was terrible at it. My first pot was a lopsided, ugly thing. But I laughed. I laughed so hard, my stomach hurt. I had clay under my fingernails and a smudge on my cheek, and I felt more beautiful than I had in years. I made a friend in that class. A woman who only knew me, not as someone's ex-wife. The small victories started to add up, building on each other like stones in a new foundation. I learned how to check the oil in my car. I traveled to a city I'd always wanted to see, by myself. I adopted a cat from a shelter, a grumpy, one-eyed creature who curled up on my lap and filled the silence with a comforting purr. There were still hard days. Days when a song on the radio would send me into a spiral of grief. Days when the weight of what I had lost felt unbearable. I saw a picture of him and his new wife on social media, smiling on the porch of my old house, and it felt like a physical blow. But the difference was, the sadness didn't consume me anymore. It was a wave that would wash over me, but I was no longer afraid of drowning. I had learned how to swim. I would let myself feel the pain, acknowledge it, and then I would let it go. I would go for a run, or call my new friend, or sit and read in my comfortable chair with my cat on my lap. I learned that healing wasn't about erasing the scars. It was about learning to live with them. Today, the woman speaking to you is not a shadow. She is not a victim. She is not defined by a man's betrayal. I am the architect of this life. A life that is smaller in some ways than the one I had before. There's no big house or fancy vacations, but it is infinitely more real. It is built not on a shared dream that turned out to be a lie, but on the solid bedrock of my own strength, my own resilience, my own self-worth. The pain hasn't vanished completely. It's part of my story, a deep, intricate pattern in the tapestry of who I am. But it's been repurposed. It's been forged into compassion, into wisdom, into an unshakable belief in my own ability to survive. My scars are not a mark of damage. They are a roadmap. They show where I have been, and they prove that I can heal. In a strange and ironic way, his act of taking everything from me was the greatest gift he ever gave me. He thought he was leveling my world, but he was actually clearing the land. He stripped away everything that wasn't truly mine, everything I was clinging to out of habit and fear. And in the empty space he created, I was forced to find what was real. I was forced to build a life on a foundation that no one could ever take away from me again. This isn't a story of revenge. I have no interest in his life anymore. My energy is better spent on my own. This is a story of reclamation. It's about taking back the narrative, about refusing to be a footnote in someone else's chapter. It's the powerful, terrifying, and ultimately beautiful truth that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to finally find everything you truly need. He thought he left me in the ashes. He thought the fire would consume me. But he didn't understand. You see, the fire doesn't destroy the phoenix. It reveals her. I didn't just rise from the ashes. I learned to dance in the flames. And I built a new world from what was left. It's funny how the beginning of a story can look so different when you know the end. When I look back now, I see it all through a different lens, a filter of experience and pain. But if I try, if I really concentrate, I can still remember what it felt like then. Untouched, full of a blinding, beautiful hope. We met in the quietest place on campus, the third-floor stacks of the university library. It was the section for political theory, a place where books went to gather dust and dreams went to be born. The air smelled of old paper and binding glue, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the fluorescent lights. I was buried in research for a paper, surrounded by a fortress of books, feeling completely overwhelmed. I needed one more source, a specific, obscure text, and there was only one copy. Of course, it was on the very top shelf, just out of my reach. I was standing on my toes, my fingers just brushing the spine, when a shadow fell over me, and then a voice, low and calm, said, "Need a hand with that?" I turned, and there he was. He wasn't classically handsome in the way you see in movies. His hair was a little too long, and he was wearing a faded gray university sweatshirt with a small hole in the cuff. But he had the kindest eyes I had ever seen. They were a deep, thoughtful brown, and they crinkled at the corners when he smiled. And his smile, it wasn't a performance. It was genuine, and it lit up his whole face. It made me feel seen. My first impression of him wasn't a lightning strike of passion. It was something quieter, deeper. It was a feeling of recognition, like my soul took a deep breath and said, "Oh, there you are. I've been looking for you." He reached up, effortlessly grabbing the book, and handed it to me. Our fingers brushed for just a second, but it was enough. A current passed between us. He didn't just hand me the book and walk away. He leaned against the bookshelf, crossed his arms, and asked me what my paper was about. In that moment, he was everything I thought I wanted. He was intelligent, but not in a way that made you feel small. He was curious. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. He had this quiet confidence, a sense of purpose. He talked about his plans for the future, not with arrogance, but with a steady, calm certainty. He was going to build things, create a life of meaning. And I believed him. I was drawn to the solidity of him. He felt like an anchor in the swirling, uncertain sea of my early 20s. He felt like home. Our first few dates weren't grand gestures. They were woven into the fabric of our real lives. Long study sessions that would bleed into late-night conversations over lukewarm coffee in the campus diner. We'd share a plate of fries and map out our futures on paper napkins. We'd walk across the moonlit campus, our shoulders bumping, talking about everything and nothing. Our families, our fears, the kind of people we hoped to become. He remembered the little things, the title of a book I'd mentioned offhand, the way I took my coffee. It felt like he was studying me with the same focus he applied to his textbooks, and I loved being the subject of his attention. I remember one night, about 6 months in, we decided to take a spontaneous road trip to the coast, a 3-hour drive just to see the ocean at sunrise. We were young and broke, driving his beat-up sedan with a sputtering radio and a trunk full of blankets and cheap snacks. About halfway there, on a dark, deserted country road, the car started to shudder. A flat tire. My heart sank. It was 2 a.m. We had no cell service. I immediately went to a place of panic, my mind racing through all the worst-case scenarios. But he just turned off the engine, plunging us into a profound silence and darkness, and looked over at me. He wasn't worried. He was amused. He gave me that slow, easy smile and said, "Well, this is an adventure." He got out the jack and the spare, and I held the flashlight for him, its weak beam cutting through the pitch-black night. He worked with a calm competence, his hands sure and steady. He didn't get frustrated or angry, he just handled it. While he worked, he told me stories, made me laugh. After the tire was changed, he didn't immediately get back in the car. He grabbed one of the blankets from the trunk, spread it on the hood of the car, and pulled me up to sit beside him. We leaned back against the windshield, wrapped in that old wool blanket, and looked up. I had never seen a sky like that. Away from the city lights, the stars were a brilliant, glittering canopy. They felt so close, like you could just reach out and scoop them up. We didn't talk for a long time. We just sat there, breathing in the cool night air, listening to the crickets. And then he turned to me, his face illuminated by the starlight, and he said, "See, nothing we can't handle, as long as we're together." In that moment, under that impossible sky, I felt a sense of peace that was absolute. It was more than just love. It was a profound and unshakable faith. A faith in him. A faith in us. I believed him with every fiber of my being. I believed we were invincible. That moment became the cornerstone of our story, the promise I built my entire world upon. A boy, a girl, and a flat tire under a sky full of stars. It was perfect. It was the beginning of everything, and it was a beautiful, perfect lie. That faith, born on a dark road under a blanket of stars, became the blueprint for our life. It was the unspoken promise that underpinned everything that came next. After graduation, our lives, which had been running on parallel tracks, merged seamlessly into one. There was no question of "nuff," we would get married. Only transition, felt as natural as breathing. He got a job at an up-and-coming architecture firm, a place where his quiet brilliance could finally take shape in steel and glass. I found a position in marketing, a job that was fine, that paid the bills, but it always felt secondary to the real project, us. The proposal came on the 4th anniversary of the day we met. It wasn't a grand, public spectacle. It was him. It was us. He took me back to the library, after hours. He'd somehow convinced one of the old security guards to let us in. The vast, silent halls were ours alone. The air still smelled of old paper and history. He led me up to the 3rd-floor stacks, to the exact spot where he'd reached for that book for me. He didn't get down on one knee. He just stood there, in the soft glow of the emergency lighting, and took both of my hands in his. He looked at me with those same kind, steady eyes and said, "This is where our story started. I think it's where our forever should too." He pulled a small, velvet box from his pocket. Inside wasn't a huge, flashy diamond. It was a simple, elegant ring with a small, perfect sapphire. My birthstone. He remembered. Of course, he remembered. My yes was a whisper that seemed to echo through the silence of a million sleeping stories. In that moment, I felt like one of them, a classic tale of love found, and futures written. We were a story I wanted to read over and over again. Our first few years of marriage were a blur of blissful construction. We saved every penny, our shared dream laser-focused on one thing, a home. Not just an apartment, not a starter house, but a asterisk home. A place with roots. We spent every Sunday for a year driving through neighborhoods, armed with coffee and a list of open houses. We were looking for the perfect canvas. And then we found it. A slightly neglected but beautiful old house, with good bones and a wraparound porch. It had a huge oak tree in the front yard that must have been 100 years old. It was more than we could afford, but we stretched ourselves thin, convinced it was an investment in our happiness. He saw the structural possibilities, the walls that could be moved, the light that could be let in. I saw the life that would happen within those walls. I saw dinner parties and Christmas mornings. I saw us growing old on that porch. We poured ourselves into that house. Our weekends were spent with paint rollers and tool belts. He was the architect, the builder, meticulously restoring the old hardwood floors and designing a new kitchen. I was the designer, the heart, choosing the colors, planting a garden, turning the empty rooms into spaces that felt like us. We were a team. Every decision was a we. What color should paint the living room? Where should we hang this picture? Our dreams were simple, tangible. We wanted to fill that house with laughter, with friends, with the smell of good food, and eventually, with the sound of children's feet running down the hall. We wanted a life that was stable, beautiful, and ours. And for a long time it was. Those years were golden. They were full of moments so happy they almost hurt to remember now. But there's one that stands out. One perfect, crystalline memory that for me symbolized the absolute peak of what we had. It was the day we got Gus. We had talked about getting a dog for years. It was the final piece. The one thing that would make our house a true home. We decided on a golden retriever, and we found a litter from a farm a couple of hours outside the city. It was a crisp autumn Saturday. The leaves were on fire with reds and oranges, and the air had that clean, cool scent of impending change. We drove out there, and the moment we saw him we knew. He was the clumsiest of the litter, all paws and ears, tripping over his own feet as he tumbled toward us. He barreled right into my legs and then just sat there, looking up at us with big, soulful brown eyes. He was perfect. The drive home he slept in my lap, a warm, fuzzy ball of pure potential. When we walked through the front door, we set him down on the newly polished floor. He blinked in the sunlight streaming through the windows, his little nose twitching, taking in all the new smells of his forever home. He took a few wobbly steps, then skidded on the wood, his legs splayed out like a cartoon character. And we just laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a deep, rolling, can't-breathe kind of laughter. We slid down to the floor with him, and he immediately started licking our faces, his puppy breath warm and sweet, his tail thumping a frantic, happy rhythm against the floorboards. I remember looking up at my husband across our goofy, sprawling puppy. The afternoon sun was catching the dust motes dancing in the air, making the whole room glow. His hair was messy, he had a smudge of dirt on his cheek, and he was looking at me with a smile of such pure, unadulterated joy that it took my breath away. In his eyes I saw everything. I saw the boy under the stars with the flat tire. I saw the man in the library stacks. I saw our future, bright and beautiful and full of this simple, perfect happiness. There were no words. There didn't need to be. In that single, silent moment on the living room floor, with our new dog between us, I felt an overwhelming sense of completeness. This was it. This was the life we had dreamed of, the life we had built, nail by nail, paint stroke by paint stroke. We had done it. We had created our own small, perfect world inside the walls of that house. I was safe, I was loved, I was home. I held on to that feeling, that image, like a precious, fragile thing. I didn't know then that it wasn't a foundation, it was a snapshot, a beautiful moment in time, just before the first, invisible crack appeared in the picture. It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment a masterpiece begins to decay. There is no single chisel mark that signals the start of the ruin. It's a process, a slow erosion, a change in the quality of the light. Looking back, the golden glow of that afternoon on the living room floor with our new puppy didn't fade overnight. It just thinned. It became less of a warm, enveloping blanket and more like a weak, winter sun that offered light but no real heat. The first signs were so small, I told myself I was imagining them. They were whispers of change, not shouts. It started with his phone. For 10 years, that phone had been a communal object. It lay on the kitchen counter, on the nightstand between us. I'd pick it up to check the weather, or answer it if he was in the shower. Then, one day, it wasn't there. It was in his pocket. Always. And it had a new password he didn't offer to share. When he sat on the couch, the screen was always angled just slightly away from me. Little adjustments. Tectonic shifts disguised as nothing. Then came the late nights at the office. He was an architect. Long hours were part of the job, but they used to be a burden we shared. He'd come home exhausted, and I'd have dinner waiting. He'd vent about impossible clients and structural problems, and I would listen, a partner in his stress. But the new late nights felt different. He didn't come home tired. He came home wired, energized, and he didn't want to talk about it. When I'd ask how his day was, the answer became a one-word wall. Fine. The details of his life, which had once been our shared narrative, were being redacted. The silence grew in our beautiful house. It filled the spaces between us at the dinner table. It sat in the passenger seat of the car. It was a heavy, suffocating presence. To fight it, I tried harder. I planned more elaborate dinners. I suggested weekend trips. I'd try to start the conversations we used to have, the ones about dreams and fears. But it was like talking to a reflection in a window. He was there, but he was also somewhere else entirely. And he looked right through me. The silence was eventually broken, but not with connection. It was broken by criticism. It started as helpful advice. You know, that dress isn't the most flattering on you. Are you sure you want to put that much salt in the sauce? It's not very healthy. My boss's wife runs marathons. You should think about taking up running. Each comment was a small, sharp pinprick into the balloon of my self-esteem. They were always delivered with a calm, reasonable tone, which was the cruelest part. It made my hurt feelings seem like an overreaction. When I'd get upset, he'd sigh, that long, suffering sigh, and say, "I'm just trying to help. I don't know why you're so sensitive." He was recasting me in our own story. I was no longer his partner. I was a project, a fixer-upper, something that needed improvement. He was the successful architect, the one with the important job and the thriving career. I was just the wife. The one whose marketing job was cute, the one who kept the house nice. He was building skyscrapers, and I was just arranging the furniture. I remember one night vividly. It was the moment I realized I was not just being ignored. I was being actively managed, manipulated. He'd been out late again, and I'd waited up. I wasn't going to be angry. I was going to be the understanding, loving wife. I just wanted to connect. When he finally walked in around 11, I was sitting in the kitchen. I asked him, gently, if everything was okay. I told him I felt a distance between us, and it was scaring me. He didn't look at me. He opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter. He took a long, slow drink before he answered. "You know," he said, his voice laced with a weary condescension. "I work 12 hours a day trying to build a life for us. I come home, and all I get is this drama. This constant need for reassurance. It's exhausting." I felt my throat tighten. "It's not drama," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm your wife. I love you. I'm worried about us." He looked at me then, and his eyes were cold, not angry, just empty. "Maybe the problem isn't us," he said. "Maybe you need to find a hobby. Something to occupy your time so you don't have to spend so much of it worrying about things that aren't there." He turned my love into a flaw, my concern into neediness, my fear into hysteria. He took my valid feelings and twisted them into a character defect. I went to bed that night feeling not just lonely, but ashamed. I lay there, next to his sleeping body, and wondered if he was right. Was I the problem? Was I imagining it all? He was so calm, so logical. I was the emotional one, the sensitive one, the one who was, perhaps, going a little crazy. He planted a seed of doubt in my mind, and in the darkness of my growing insecurity, it took root and grew like a weed. The confirmation, the moment the vague, terrifying suspicion became a cold, hard certainty, wasn't a confession. It was a scent. He came home from a client dinner one Thursday night. I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. He slipped in beside me, trying to be quiet. But the air changed. It was the smell of perfume. A floral, slightly spicy scent that was sophisticated and expensive. And, definitively, not mine. My heart started to pound so hard, I was sure he could hear it. I kept my breathing even, my eyes shut tight. After a few minutes, when I knew he was asleep, I slipped out of bed and went to the laundry hamper where he'd thrown his shirt. I lifted it to my face and inhaled. There it was again, stronger this time, clinging to the collar. It was the scent of a whole other life, a life I had no part in. I stood there in the dark, holding his shirt, and the floor dropped out from under me. Every late night, every secret phone call, every critical comment, every cold look, it all snapped into focus. It wasn't in my head. I wasn't crazy. I was being betrayed. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. I was living inside a horror movie that only I could see. I would watch him across the breakfast table laughing at something Gus, our dog, was doing, and I would think, "Who are you?" I would lie next to him at night, feeling the warmth of his body, and I would be consumed by an icy rage. He was a stranger sleeping in my husband's skin. I didn't confront him. Not yet. What would I say? Your shirt smelled like perfume? I knew what he would do. He would use that calm, reasonable voice. He would have a plausible explanation. A colleague who hugged him. A crowded elevator. He would sigh and tell me I was being paranoid again. He would make me the villain. And without proof, without anything more than a scent and a gut feeling that was screaming at me, I was afraid I would believe him. I was afraid of being made to feel crazy one more time. So I lived with the ghost. I played the part of the happy wife, while inside, I was meticulously gathering the evidence of my own life's destruction. I became a detective in my own home. It was a poison. The knowledge was a corrosive acid, eating away at our shared history, dissolving every happy memory into a potential lie. Our trip to Italy? Was he thinking of her? Our anniversary dinner? Was he texting her under the table? The man who promised me, under a sky full of stars, that we could handle anything together, was the very one causing the wreckage. And the worst part? He was making me feel like I was the one holding the sledgehammer. He wasn't just having an affair. He was methodically, cruelly, and deliberately driving me insane. The poison of knowing worked its way through my system for weeks. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the rooms of my beautiful home, watching a stranger wear my husband's face. I didn't need a detective. I didn't need to check his phone records or hire a private investigator. The truth was a living thing in our house, a third person in our bed. But I still clung to the wreckage, telling myself that if I didn't say the words, if I didn't give it a name, maybe it wasn't real. Maybe we could survive. The final straw wasn't a discovery. It was a performance. It was our annual fall party, an event I had orchestrated for years. Our house, our friends, my cooking. It was the centerpiece of the life I thought we had. This year, the air was different, tense. I moved through the rooms, smiling, refilling wine glasses, but my skin was crawling. I felt the whispers, the glances that lingered a second too long. They knew. Everyone knew. And then, she walked in. She was with another couple, a casual guest. Her perfume hit me first. That floral, spicy scent from his shirt. It was like a physical blow. She was beautiful, of course. Sleek, confident, the kind of woman who looked like she was born in high heels. He didn't miss a beat. He walked over to her group, a charming smile plastered on his face. He kissed her on the cheek, a familiar, easy gesture, and then he brought her over to me. To me. Standing in my own kitchen. "Honey," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "This is Catherine. She's a new partner at the firm. We've been working on the big downtown project together." He looked at me, his eyes daring me to react, to make a scene, to prove I was the hysterical, sensitive wife he'd been painting me as. I looked at her, this woman who had been sleeping with my husband, and she just smiled, a cool, appraising look in her eyes. "It's so lovely to finally meet you," she said. "He's told me so much about you." That was it, the public execution. He hadn't just brought his affair into our life. He had brought it into our home. stood it in front of me, and demanded I shake its hand. In that moment, surrounded by the friends who had celebrated our wedding, in the kitchen I had designed, I wasn't his wife. I was the inconvenient, oblivious obstacle. And the look on his face wasn't guilt. It was triumph. He was showing her, and everyone else, who held the power. He was humiliating me to impress her. My love for him, our entire history, it didn't just die in that moment. It was murdered. I don't remember the rest of the party. I was on autopilot, smiling, nodding, clearing plates. But the moment the last guest left, the silence that crashed down was monumental. He was in the living room, loosening his tie, a drink in his hand. He looked pleased. I stood in the doorway, my heart a cold, dead weight in my chest. I didn't scream. My voice was eerily calm. I want her out of our life. He took a slow sip of his drink. He didn't even look at me. Catherine is my colleague. You're being irrational. Don't, I said, the word a shard of glass. Don't you dare call me irrational. I know. I've known for weeks. He finally turned to look at me, and there it was. The expression I had seen in my nightmares. Not sorrow, not regret, just weariness. Like I was a problem he was finally tired of solving. He sighed. Look, it just happened. These things are complicated. The only thing complicated here, I said, is how you could stand in our kitchen and do that to me. He put his glass down and walked towards me. For a second, a stupid, hopeful part of me thought he was going to hold me, to apologize. But he stopped a few feet away, his face a mask of cold resolve. I'm not happy, he said. I haven't been for a long time. I think we should get a divorce. He said it. He said the word. And it hung in the air between us like a guillotine. He didn't say it in anger. He said it like he was ordering a coffee. A simple, practical solution. My entire world had just been set on fire, and he was calmly walking away from the blaze. All I could do was stare at him, the man who held a flashlight for me on a dark road, and promised we could handle anything. He wasn't that man anymore. Maybe he never was. The days that followed were a blur of cold, efficient cruelty. He didn't move out. He insisted be the one to leave the home, had built. It just makes more sense, he said. I work closer to here. Our house became an occupied territory. We were two hostile strangers, living under the same roof, communicating through terse, sterile text messages. I packed my life into cardboard boxes while he went about his days, as if nothing had changed. The friends we shared? They vanished. A few sent awkward, pitying texts. Let me know if you need anything. But the invitations stopped. The phone calls ceased. I was radioactive, a social liability. They chose the intact couple, the successful man, the one who wasn't falling apart. The divorce process itself was not a separation, it was a war. A scorched earth campaign, designed to leave me with nothing. Every memory was weaponized. Our romantic trip to Italy became evidence of my financial irresponsibility. The nights I stayed up helping him with business plans were twisted into proof that I was controlling. He fought me for everything, not out of need, but out of spite. He fought me for the worn-out armchair in the corner of the living room. It was my reading chair, the place I'd curled up with hundreds of books, with our dog Gus at my feet. He didn't even like the chair, but he knew I loved it. It was about proving he could take it, and he did. The hardest day was the deposition. I sat across a polished mahogany table from him and his lawyer. My own lawyer sat beside me, but I felt completely alone. His lawyer, a sharp-faced woman with a merciless smile, grilled me for hours. She brought up a time I had been emotional after a miscarriage we'd had years ago, framing it as evidence of my mental instability. He just sat there, watching, his face impassive, as the most painful moments of my life were dissected and labeled as character flaws. He didn't just let her do it. He had given her the ammunition. He had handed her the knife and pointed to the softest parts of my heart. I looked at him, this man I had loved, this man I had grieved with, and I saw a complete and utter stranger. A monster. The day we signed the final papers was gray and overcast, the sky the color of dirty snow. We were in a sterile conference room. The papers were a thick, heavy stack on the table between us. My lawyer pushed them toward me and pointed to the places where I needed to sign my name, over and over again. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely form the letters. Each signature felt like a small death. Signing away the house. signing away our savings, signing away the future I had invested my entire soul in, signing away my name. When it was over, I felt hollowed out. There was no relief, there was no catharsis, just a vast, echoing emptiness. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and gathered his things without a single glance in my direction. He walked out of that room and out of my life, as easily as one walks out of a movie theater when the credits roll. I sat there for a long time after he was gone, just staring at my signature on the last page. It looked like the writing of a stranger. I was left with nothing but a key to an empty apartment, and the crushing, terrifying realization that the woman who had walked into this room no longer existed. She had been signed away, piece by piece, and I had no idea who or what was left. The first few months after the ink dried on those papers were a study in silence. The empty apartment I had once seen as a prison became something else. It became a laboratory, an echo chamber where I was forced to listen to the only voice left, my own. The loneliness was a physical presence, a heavy blanket on the hottest days. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, convinced I heard his key in the lock, a phantom limb of a life that had been amputated. I missed the simple things, the mundane rhythms of a shared life, the sound of his coffee grinder in the morning, the weight of another person in the bed. I grieved for the man I thought I had married, for the future I had lost, and most painfully for the woman I had been. But in that vast, silent space, something else began to grow, tiny green shoots of freedom. It started with the thermostat. I could keep it as warm as I wanted without an argument. It was buying the expensive artisanal cheese he would have called a waste of money. It was blasting a sad indie rock song on repeat for 3 hours while I cleaned, just because I could. Each small act of self-determination was a reclamation. I was no longer one half of a compromise. I was a whole number. And while the grief was a tidal wave, these moments were life rafts. They were proof that another shore existed, even if I couldn't see it yet. Healing, I learned, is not a destination. It's dirty, manual labor. I found a therapist, a kind woman with wise eyes, who didn't let me get away with anything. In her office, I unpacked the years of emotional baggage I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I learned to identify the sound of his voice in my head, the one that called me sensitive, irrational, needy, and I learned how to tell it to shut up. I learned that my feelings weren't a flaw, they were a compass, and for the first time, I started to trust its direction. I re-enrolled in my own life. I took that pottery class, and then a cooking class, and then a ridiculously difficult yoga class. I wasn't trying to become a new person. I was trying to meet the one who had been there all along. I reconnected with my college roommate, the one who knew me before I became a we. We talked for hours, and she reminded me of the girl I used to be, the one who was fierce and funny and a little bit wild. I found my people, the ones who didn't run from the fire but who were willing to sit with me in the ashes. And I poured myself into my work. My cute marketing job became my canvas. I took on projects that scared me. I spoke up in meetings. I presented ideas with a confidence that felt foreign at first, then exhilarating. I wasn't just building a career. I was building proof of my own competence. Today, my life looks nothing like the one I lost, and I thank God for that every single day. I still live in that same apartment, but it is no longer empty. The walls are filled with art I chose, pieces that are vibrant and a little strange. The wobbly bookcase I built with my own 2 hands is overflowing with books. My grumpy one-eyed cat, whom I named Odysseus for his own epic journey, is usually asleep on my favorite chair, the comfortable one I bought to replace the one he took. My routine is my own. It's quiet. It's peaceful. It's built around what nourishes my soul, not what placates someone else's ego. The woman I am now is fundamentally different. I am calmer. I am stronger. I am so much kinder to myself. I learned that my capacity for love was never the problem. My willingness to sacrifice my own well-being for it was. I learned that a true partnership is not about 2 halves making a whole. It's about 2 whole people choosing to share their journey, without asking either to shrink themselves to fit. I learned that the most important relationship I will ever have is the one I have with myself, and I am finally treating it with the respect it deserves. Have I forgiven him? That's a complicated question. I don't spend my energy on him anymore. I don't wish him ill, but I don't wish him well. I am simply indifferent. The forgiveness I have worked for is for myself. I forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner. I forgive myself for believing in a promise that was built on a lie. I forgive myself for staying when my gut was screaming at me to run. Forgiving, for me, was about taking the knife he'd left in my back, pulling it out, and finally letting the wound close. It wasn't about him. It was about my own survival. As for the future, it's a beautiful, blank page. For the first time in my adult life, I am not planning 5 or 10 years ahead. I am not looking for a man to write the next chapter with me. I'm open to the idea of love again, of course. I'm a romantic at heart. But the price of admission into my life is so much higher now. It would have to be a love that feels like peace, not a storm. A love that adds to my solitude, not disrupts it. But I am not waiting for it. I am busy living. I am building my business. I am traveling. I am nurturing my friendships. I am finally, truly, getting to know myself. He thought he was writing the end of my story. He had no idea he was just clearing the way for me to pick up the pen and write a much better one myself. If I could reach back through time and find that woman, the one sitting on the cold floor of that empty apartment, drowning in the silence, I wouldn't tell her that it's all going to be okay. Because okay is too small a word for what's coming. Okay was the life she had before. What's coming is a life that is truly, unshakably co-rise. The pain she feels in that moment, that crushing world-ending weight, it's not the end of her story. It's the pressure that will forge her into the person she was always meant to be. It's the chisel that will chip away everything that wasn't real, leaving only the masterpiece that was buried underneath. And if I could go back even further, to that girl in the library, the one with hope shining in her eyes, so ready to build a life around this kind, steady man, what would I say to her? I wouldn't tell her to run. Her journey was my journey, and I would not trade the strength I have now for an easier path. But I would lean in and whisper in her ear. I would tell her, don't ever let your, me, dissolve into the we. Nurture it. Protect it. Your dreams are not secondary projects. They are part of the main foundation. I'd tell her. That little voice inside you, the one that sometimes whispers that something feels off, it's not paranoia, it's not neediness. It is your wisest counselor. Trust it, always. I would tell her, your worth is not measured by how well you keep a home or how seamlessly you support someone else's ambition. Your worth is inherent. It was there long before him, and my God, you have no idea how brightly it's going to shine after him. I would tell her that the greatest love story she will ever write is not with him. It's the one she is about to begin with herself. So if you are listening to this right now, and you are on your own floor, in your own empty room, I see you. I know the silence you're hearing. I know the shame that feels like it's sticking to your skin. And I am here to tell you that this is not your burial ground. This is your foundation. This is rock bottom, and it is the most solid place you will ever stand. The life that was taken from you was built on someone else's terms. The one you are about to build will have a foundation so deep and so strong that no person, no storm, will ever be able to touch it. Because you will build it with your own 2 hands. Out of your own tears, your own courage, and your own unbreakable will. The journey is not easy. It will ask everything of you. You will have to face every ghost and every fear. But the small victories, the first time you laugh so hard you cry, the first trip you take alone, the first time you look in the mirror and recognize the powerful, resilient person staring back, those moments will be your fuel. He thought he took everything. Let him think that. What he really did was clear the land. He left you with the only thing that truly matters. He left you with you. And from that, from what was left, you can build a universe.